Hello, listener. It's time to dive into the Juniverse, where tales of infidelity, betrayal, and heart-wrenching confessions pull you into the vast unknown.
Jake had always been the kind of man who believed in the strength of his relationships. At 28, newly married to Emily, the woman he'd adored since their high school days, he felt certain that their bond was unbreakable. They had been through so much together, shared laughter, dreams, and even the inevitable challenges that come with any partnership. But recently, something had changed, and Jake couldn't ignore it any longer. It started off small. Emily's once warm and radiant smile had become a mere flicker, like a candle losing its flame. Her usual affectionate gestures, her hand resting on his leg while watching TV, the gentle kisses goodbye in the morning, had disappeared, replaced by an uncomfortable void. Jake, ever the trusting soul, told himself that it was just the pressures of everyday life. After all, work had been stressful, and the responsibilities of marriage were no small feat. Maybe it was simply a phase, something that would pass. But as days turned into weeks, the subtle shifts became undeniable. Emily's phone became an obsession in their home. She clutched it tightly in her hands, her eyes darting nervously whenever Jake entered the room. Her usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by a cold, almost mechanical politeness that unsettled him. She was distant, both physically and emotionally. At first, Jake tried to brush it off. He reminded himself that she had a busy schedule and that everyone goes through phases of exhaustion. But the nagging feeling in the pit of his stomach grew stronger, like an itch he couldn't scratch. One evening, Emily returned home later than usual after a work dinner. Her eyes were tired. But something else, something darker, lingered behind her gaze. The familiar warmth he had once relied on was gone, replaced by a veil of detachment. "Emily, what's going on?" Jake asked, trying to break through the wall she had built around herself. "I'm just tired," she replied, her voice flat and dismissive. The words themselves weren't alarming, but it was the way she said them, too quick, too practiced, that sent a cold shiver down Jake's spine. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he tried to make sense of it all. He knew her too well. There was more to it than just exhaustion. Emily's eyes, usually so open and inviting, now seemed like a fortress, guarding something he wasn't meant to know. She had always been open with him, sharing her thoughts, her dreams, and her worries. But now, it felt like he was talking to a stranger. For the next few days, Jake watched her closely. She was always on her phone, texting or scrolling, her fingers moving quickly as though she was hiding something. Whenever he entered the room, she would quickly turn the screen away from him, as though he might catch a glimpse of the secret she was keeping. It was subtle, but unmistakable. She had become a woman he didn't recognize, and it left him feeling helpless and confused. One afternoon, after she had finished a call, one of those brief, secretive conversations that always ended the moment he walked in, the uneasy feeling gnawed at Jake's insides. He finally decided to confront her. His voice trembled, trying to mask the anxiety that had built up in him. "Emily, what's going on? You've been distant lately. I need to know if something's wrong." Her response was a quick, almost reflexive, "I'm fine." But her eyes didn't meet his. They darted away, avoiding his gaze like a guilty child. Jake felt a wave of frustration rise within him. This wasn't like her. Emily was never the type to shut him out. So why was she doing it now? The nagging feeling only intensified, twisting in his gut like a cruel, insistent whisper. He began to notice more signs, her sudden exits when he asked about her day, her refusal to open up, her evasions about where she'd been, and always, her phone, now an unspoken barrier between them. What was she hiding? And why wasn't she letting him in? The uncertainty, the lack of answers, was eating away at him. Every time he tried to reach out, to understand what was going on, the distance between them grew wider. Jake, a man who had always trusted his wife, now found himself questioning everything. Was he simply overthinking things? Or was the truth darker than he could ever imagine? One night, as Emily slipped into bed beside him, her back turned to him, Jake knew he had to find out. He could feel the weight of the unanswered questions pressing down on him. He needed answers, no matter how much it hurt. Jake sat in the dim light of the local bar, his beer nearly untouched, the weight of his thoughts heavier than the glass in his hand. His best friend, Ryan, leaned back in his chair, his usual carefree grin plastered across his face as he talked about his latest dating adventures. But Jake couldn't shake the gnawing feeling inside him. Emily, his wife, was slipping away, and he couldn't figure out why. Man, she's been acting strange, Jake muttered, his voice betraying the frustration he had been holding inside for days. I don't know what's going on, but something's off. Ryan, who had always been the jokester, chuckled lightly at first. Maybe she's just not getting enough attention at home. Dude, you know how it is. Relationships need a little spark every now and then. Jake nodded half-heartedly, but didn't buy it. He knew Emily, and this wasn't some simple lack of attention. Something deeper was festering between them, and it was pulling them apart slowly but surely. He tried to brush it off, but the worry weighed heavily on him. Ryan, sensing that Jake wasn't buying into the easy answer, leaned forward, his tone shifting to something more serious. Look, Jake, he began, his voice low. Sometimes women, they pour so much energy into affairs that they forget how to give us the respect we deserve. Jake froze, his beer momentarily forgotten. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Ryan's tone was casual, but the truth behind his words felt like a cold slap to the face. You think? Jake's voice faltered, the thought too painful to say aloud. The idea had never crossed his mind. Emily? His Emily? She had always been so loyal, so present. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing, spreading like wildfire in his chest. Ryan didn't reply immediately, letting the weight of his words sink in. I'm not saying that's what's going on, he said carefully. But think about it. Why else would she be acting this way? People don't just change overnight unless something's pushing them to. The silence between them thickened. Jake's mind raced, replaying every conversation, every strange look, every odd behavior Emily had shown in the past few weeks. Her dismissive attitude, her secrecy, her sudden absences, were they signs he had missed? He had always trusted her. He wanted to trust her, but now everything felt like it was unraveling in front of him. I don't know what to think, Jake admitted, his words laced with a mix of confusion and hurt. He ran a hand through his hair, as if trying to untangle the web of doubt in his mind. I don't even want to consider that she might be cheating on me. But he trailed off, the weight of his suspicion suffocating him. Ryan nodded but said nothing more, his expression serious. He could see the internal battle Jake was fighting, and it pained him. He was used to Jake being the strong one, the one who didn't let his emotions control him. But now, it was clear that the seed of doubt had been planted deep in his friend's heart, and there was no easy way out. That night, when Jake finally lay beside Emily in their bed, her breathing soft and steady, he couldn't escape the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He watched her for a long time, the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest only serving to amplify the distance between them. Emily was still, but Jake felt like he was in the midst of a storm. His mind raced, thoughts spinning out of control. Was this really just stress? Or had Ryan's words hit closer to home than he could bear? His fingers brushed the edge of the covers, his body tense with uncertainty. He had to know the truth. No more guessing, no more wandering in the dark. He had to find out if his worst fears were true. That gnawing suspicion had taken root, and now it was a parasite that wouldn't let go. Jake knew what he had to do. He couldn't lie to himself any longer. As he lay there beside Emily, pretending to sleep, his mind was already working out the plan. Tomorrow, he would begin looking for the answers, no matter what they might reveal. The truth was out there, and he was going to uncover it. Days stretched into an unbearable silence. Jake found himself caught in a tug-of-war between the man he once was, trusting, patient, and the man he was becoming, suspicious, restless, and consumed by a growing sense of dread. The unease gnawed at him relentlessly. The idea of invading Emily's privacy had always felt like a line he couldn't cross, but now, with every passing moment, his fear deepened. His wife, the woman he had promised to stand by for better or worse, was slipping away from him, and he couldn't remain in the dark any longer. The thought of Emily's phone, her lifeline to the outside world, had become like an itch he couldn't ignore. He'd never imagined himself as the kind of man who would snoop. But every time he saw her texting in secret or heard her hushed tones on the phone, his doubts multiplied. The opportunity came one night when Emily took a late-night call. One of those calls that always seemed to happen when Jake was left alone with his thoughts. She stepped outside, her voice barely audible through the window as she spoke in whispers, her words laced with mystery. The moment she was out of earshot, Jake's heart pounded in his chest. The temptation was too great. With shaky hands, he reached for her phone, his pulse quickening. Emily had always been open with him about their devices, but now there was a coldness to everything. His fingers fumbled nervously as he unlocked it, the screen lighting up in the dark room. The first thing he saw was a string of messages from someone named Noah. The name struck him like a sharp, foreign object. He had never heard of Noah before. Who was this person? Why had Emily kept him a secret? Jake scrolled, his eyes widening with each message. What started as simple, innocent exchanges quickly escalated into something more intimate. The messages dripped with flirtation, a side of Emily he had never seen, a side she had carefully hidden from him. His stomach twisted as he read their words, soft teasing, inside jokes, and phrases that held a weight he didn't want to understand. The intimacy was palpable. It was clear that the connection between Emily and Noah went far beyond the realm of friendship. His hands trembled as he read further. He came across plans, detailed, meticulous plans for a trip. Emily and Noah had been making arrangements for a getaway. The words work retreat had been tossed around before, but now, as he scrolled through their conversation, Jake's heart sank. This wasn't a work retreat. This wasn't a professional trip. This was something entirely different, a romantic escape. Emily had been planning a trip with Noah for months, a secret she had kept hidden from him for far too long. His mind raced, piecing together the fragments. The getaway was in a location Emily had never mentioned, the details of which made Jake's head spin. A weekend trip, full of private moments, with someone who wasn't him. The thought felt like a punch to the gut. The plans, the excitement in their words. It was all so painfully clear now. Emily had lied to him. She had betrayed him. Jake's heart thudded painfully in his chest as he continued to read the intimate exchanges. His mind screamed in disbelief, but the evidence was undeniable. The messages weren't casual. They weren't just friendly or innocent. They were full of passion, of longing, of something Jake could never give her. He had been so blind, so trusting. But now, with every word he read, every detail of their secret getaway, the truth hit him like a wave. The wife he had loved, the woman he had built his life around, had been living another life without him. His fingers hovered over the screen as the room seemed to close in around him. The weight of the betrayal crushed him. But a different kind of fire began to burn in his chest, one that demanded justice. He wasn't going to let this slide. Emily had deceived him, and now he was going to uncover everything. Jake's heart had shattered in 1,000 pieces, but his emotions had quickly hardened into something far colder. The devastation of betrayal burned like acid in his veins. But it was swiftly replaced with a burning determination. If Emily was going to tear apart everything they had built, he wouldn't let it happen without consequences. He would not be the fool who stood by, watching her rewrite their history with another man. The realization of their secret getaway, New Orleans, a city they had once fantasized about visiting together, struck Jake like a thunderbolt. The city of music, romance, and mystery was now tainted. It wasn't going to be a place of healing or rediscovery for Emily and him. No, it was going to be the stage for his revenge, the place where her lies would crumble into dust. Jake's anger brewed quietly, simmering beneath a mask of calm. Emily had always loved surprises, and for this betrayal, he was going to surprise her in the most devastating way possible. He had already made his move. His flight was booked. Emily, so sure of herself, had left for what she had claimed was a bridal shower. Her innocent excuse hanging in the air like a bitter taste in Jake's mouth. But Jake knew the truth now, and he wasn't going to wait around. He wasn't going to sit at home like an obedient husband, letting her weave her lies. No, Jake was already on his way. He arrived in New Orleans a day earlier than Emily and Noah. He walked the vibrant streets alone, trying to drown out the whirlwind of emotions that swirled inside him. The architecture was grand, the sounds of jazz drifting through the air, and yet all Jake could focus on was his mission. His thoughts were consumed by the plan that was unfolding in his mind. He wasn't here for sightseeing or to lose himself in the beauty of the city. He was here to expose Emily's betrayal, the rage, the pain. It was all there, threatening to tear him apart. But Jake, ever the strategist, kept it locked behind a mask of cold composure. His jaw was set, his steps deliberate. He wouldn't give Emily the satisfaction of seeing him crumble. She had shattered his heart, but he wasn't going to let her see the aftermath. No, his plan was perfect. And he would make sure that Emily's illusion of love would come crashing down around her in the most public, unforgiving way. As the evening approached, Jake knew the time was coming. He could feel it in his bones. Emily and Noah would be arriving soon, and when they did, they would find him waiting, poised and ready to tear down the lies that had built her world. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Every moment he spent walking through the streets of New Orleans, every minute that ticked by, only added fuel to the fire burning inside him. It wasn't about redemption anymore, it was about justice. Emily had stolen something from him, and Jake was going to take it back in a way that would leave her reeling. She had betrayed him, hidden her affair beneath a mask of smiles and excuses, and now, it was time for her to face the truth. The quiet rage built inside him, an invisible force he carried with every step. Jake would catch them in the act, his presence a silent witness to their lies. And then, when the moment came, he would destroy everything. Emily's carefully constructed world would shatter. And for the first time in weeks, Jake felt a flicker of something like power, something that might just allow him to breathe again. The next day, everything fell into place with a precision that felt almost surreal. Armed with the itinerary he had painstakingly gathered, Jake followed their every move, each step a calculated maneuver to ensure that he would be in the right place at the right time. His heart raced as he watched their plans unfold, his every sense alert to the moment when the truth would be revealed. The spot was the first stop. Jake arrived early, his pulse quickening as he approached the serene building. The sounds of soft music and laughter drifting from within. He could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him as he stood outside, his eyes scanning the door with a mixture of anticipation and dread. It wasn't a question of if they would show up, it was a question of when. His hands were clammy, but he gripped the edge of his jacket, forcing himself to remain still. The minutes stretched into hours, each passing second pulling him deeper into the storm of emotions that churned inside. He could hardly breathe, but he stayed focused, refusing to let the adrenaline cloud his judgment. He had been waiting for this moment for so long, and now the confrontation would come, whether he was ready or not. Finally, 2 hours later, the door opened. Emily and Noah emerged, laughing lightly, their voices carefree and intimate. The sound of their shared laughter hit Jake like a slap, and his heart clenched at the sight of them. There they were together, just as he had suspected. Their hands intertwined in a gesture that tore at the fabric of everything Jake had believed in. Emily, his wife, walking beside the man who had stolen her heart, or perhaps, who had always held a piece of it. Jake's pulse thundered in his ears, but he remained motionless. He had come this far, and he would not let his emotions get the better of him now. He approached them with deliberate steps, each one measured, his gaze fixed on Emily. He spoke her name with cold precision, Emily. She froze, her eyes widening in shock when she saw him standing there, calm but unyielding. Her mouth opened as if to say something, but no words came. Jake didn't wait for her to gather her thoughts. He turned his gaze to Noah, his voice low and steady, yet cutting. "Who is this?" he asked, the words laced with venom. Emily's face drained of color, and her eyes darted nervously from Jake to Noah, the lie already forming on her lips. "This is Noah," she stammered, her words a desperate attempt to cover the cracks in her deceit. But the lie was so thin, it was almost laughable. Jake didn't flinch. He didn't need to. The truth was already there, standing between them. "Noah." Jake's tone sharpened, each syllable a weapon. "Funny, I don't remember you mentioning him. I also don't remember you telling me about this work retreat either. Is this the trip you were so excited about?" His words cut through the air, and the silence that followed was deafening. Emily's face crumpled as the weight of the truth hit her, and she knew there was no escape. Noah, caught in the act, shifted uncomfortably. His eyes flickered from Jake to Emily, but he didn't dare speak. He knew that he was an intruder in someone else's life, and that was a reality he could not escape. He stayed silent, his discomfort palpable, but it didn't matter. This wasn't his fight. This was Jake's, and Emily had no one to blame but herself. Emily reached for Jake's hand, a desperate gesture, but Jake pulled away sharply, a coldness in his eyes that mirrored the devastation inside him. He didn't want her touch. He didn't need her apologies. She had already taken everything from him. "You're pathetic," Jake said, his voice thick with a mix of anger and sorrow. The words were low, but they carried a weight that made Emily flinch. "You threw everything we had away for a weekend with this guy?" His voice cracked slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. He wasn't here for reconciliation. He wasn't here for forgiveness. He was here to show her the gravity of her actions, to make her face the consequences of the lies she had woven around them. Emily's eyes filled with tears, and she began to cry, her sobs racking her body. Jake watched her, but there was no pity in his heart, only the bitter taste of betrayal. He had loved her, truly loved her, and this was how she repaid him. This wasn't a moment for weakness. And he wouldn't allow himself to break. He couldn't. For a brief moment, a flicker of sympathy passed through him, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. Emily had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and no amount of tears would change that. She had made her choice. And now, Jake was going to make her understand just how costly that choice would be. He wasn't here to fix things. He was here to destroy the life she had built on lies. As Emily continued to cry, Jake turned and walked away, the echoes of her broken sobs lingering in the air. He had done what he came to do. The truth had been exposed, and nothing would ever be the same again. Jake walked away from the parking lot, leaving Emily and Noah behind in the echo of their humiliation. As he boarded his flight home the next day, his heart weighed heavy. The confrontation hadn't brought the closure he'd hoped for, but it had been necessary. Emily's desperate calls and texts begging for forgiveness went unanswered. Jake remained silent. His emotions tangled in a whirlwind of anger and sorrow. It was over. The trust they'd built over years of marriage was shattered. Jake had walked away with his dignity intact. But Emily's betrayal would haunt her forever. She would always remember the moment her lies were exposed, not just by the evidence, but by the man who once loved her. Jake's revenge was swift, calculated, and cold. It was the only way to win back his pride. Thank you for listening. If you were Jake, what would you do in this situation? Which moment made you realize the betrayal? Was it the secret getaway or the hidden messages? Share your thoughts in the comments.